I have been personally following your journey over the years, and I just have so much admiration for you. I love the way you show up on social, just so real and vulnerable. There are times where, I'm a founder, I feel like I'm defeated or lonely, and I have actually gone on your page and like just need you for inspiration. I'm like, she gets it. She's been there. So I love how real and vulnerable you are. It's been a huge part of my journey. So thank you for everything that you do.
No problem. I don't know how to be any other way. I think that's the easiest way to say it. And my team knows this. I'm like the queen of the late night post. Like most of my posts are very late at night when I'm sitting at the end of the day by myself, just kind of reflecting on what's happening. And, it's interesting. I started Knix 12 years ago now. And it was at some points like that I've gone through many different eras of entrepreneurship and sort of seeing how entrepreneurs are celebrated or torn down. And during some of my, most fundamental years, I really felt like everyone was just out there pretending that it was so easy. And you saw founders on the cover of magazines, and it felt like everything that they touched turned to gold. And I actually at moments felt like there was something wrong with me. Like I was like, how is this so freaking hard for me? And it feels like everyone else is just like having the time of their lives. And so I really started sharing because I needed an outlet, and I wasn't seeing anyone else really be vulnerable and real about what it was like. And now I guess I've just kept that going for a few years now.
I love that. And that's like why I'm so passionate about getting stories like yours out there in this podcast, because I think you're right. People glamorize entrepreneurship. Even me listening to 200 women like you, like I know the problems, I know the in and out. Even there's days where I have tough moments where I'm like, is it me? Am I the one that doesn't know how to run this business, or am I defeated? Like, why is this so hard? And I have to catch myself like in that victim mentality. It's so easy to go there when you're like on your fourth hardest day, you're pushing something across the finish line. So I just appreciate the realness, because if we can all know that running a growing business, it comes with challenges, it comes with problems, like that's part of it. It actually makes it not easier, but you can level set a little bit better expectation wise. So I love the intention behind your posts and everything you're doing. But there's a lot for us to talk about and dig into your story. But I also want to start off with something that you mentioned in another interview, which I love so much, where you said, when it comes to entrepreneurship, no one knows what they're doing. There's no playbook. There's no shortcuts. We have a lot of women listening today who want to take that leap, want to follow their passion, and might be waiting for that perfect time or making sure that they're the right expert when their time comes. Tell me more about what you mean by that, because I think it could help so many women.
I've met a lot of founders and female founders over the years, I should say, not 1 year, many years. And I hear sort of two different themes or stories. So one is, I have this idea, but I don't know if I'm the right person to do it. And I'm not sure if I have the credentials. And so sort of questioning themselves before they even get started, and always having a reason why now is not the time. And what I learned, I was really fortunate. I worked on Knix while I was at business school. I spent a year on the business plan and pulling everything together. And a business plan is helpful. It can act as like a roadmap or a blueprint. But the truth is that once you launch and get started, it all goes out the window. Yeah. Because everything you thought was going to happen doesn't. Some things are easier, some things are harder, some things take more money, some things take less. And so you are never going to know what you're stepping into until you're actually into it. And so that's sort of one common theme that I've seen. And then the second one is for folks who have actually launched. And I've been asked more times than I can tell you, like, what's the silver bullet? Like, what's the one thing I need to do to crack the code of my business? And there is no silver bullet. It's different for every single brand. You have to try 100 things to get one thing right. And I wish that we just sort of celebrated that idea that not everything is going to go right, and you need to kind of fail your way into success, for lack of a better way of describing it. And that's just a reflection that I've had over the years. The other piece is about growing a business or operating a business. And one thing that I've noticed, and it doesn't matter if things are going well or if things are going not so well, like you are constantly questioning yourself. So when things are going well, every single day you're running a company that's bigger than it was before, a team that's bigger, you feel like you're in over your head, imposter syndrome kicks in. I could run a business of that size, but can I do it now? And so that's sort of one side. And then on the flip, when things aren't going well, you're constantly questioning yourself. Why did I do this? Why did I think I could do this? And so I think as a founder, you just have to get used to living in this constant state of insecurity, like uneasiness, and finding the tools to find your way through that.
There's so much I want to unpack there. I love that. I love that you said it's like this uneasiness, because you're so right. I'm only 3 years on my journey, but I've noticed like each pillar you have to grow into another person. I'm like, all right, I got this. And the next thing you know, the business is growing or there's another issue I've never dealt with. So I could imagine 12 years you're being pushed with this uneasiness. And you also mentioned in one of your posts that I loved is also being a founder. Not only are you dealing with this uncomfort, it's kind of an invisible road because it's something you can't really share with your team or maybe some friends because they don't understand. And that's not their position, right? They're not, the employees are there to support you, but they don't really understand, nor should they really like the mental load of this invisible work that you do behind the scenes. So you mentioned there's a lot of tools that can support you. You know, you've been doing this for so long. What have you found helpful kind of dealing with this uneasiness that we have to be so used to on a day-to-day basis?
So number one, a strong network and community of other founders. That has been so crucial for me. Just having my little squad of people who are going through similar things. And, you know, you don't have to talk to them every day, but I think that connection of having the folks that when you are down in the dumps, you can kind of emergency text them SOS and get on a call and they pick you up and then they go in the dumps themselves and you pick them up. And it's this like back and forth. So I think having a founder network is so important. Listening to podcasts has been another huge thing for me as well. My husband thinks I'm like such a nerd and so lame because every car ride we go in, I'm like, let's put on a founder podcast. And he's like, enough already. Isn't this work? And it is work, but it's also therapy, I think. It's just like feeling like you're not alone and listening to someone else going through it and hearing stories of success and failure. So podcasts have been hugely important to me. And I do think I've learned over the years to lean on my team a bit more and finding that balance, which has been helpful too. And there's been an interesting shift, I have to say. I don't know if you've seen this, but especially recently, there's so many brands that are going through extremely tough times. Like it's a hard time to be running a company. And there's this almost move towards like complete radical transparency. Like quite a few of the brands I follow actually get on social and they say, we're doing this sale because we have to. And if we don't sell these units, then we're going to be in trouble. And it's like, to me, I'm just in awe of that because it is just a whole other level of like leaning into the broader community to support you.
That is so interesting. And I love what you said about leaning onto your team because that's something that I'm learning. It's so easy, especially as a founder, where you're so used to doing everything yourself and being like, I don't want to burden somebody else or loop them in, but that's what they're here for. And it's so much better to do it as a team than not. And I know in another interview you were talking about, again, so appreciate your openness. Like you had a really rough morning before you were joining this podcast that you did, and you called your husband and you were just, started crying. I literally think to myself sometimes, because I can cry and it's okay. I can pick myself back up again. I don't sit in that space and I'm always judging myself for that. But maybe it's a good outlet. I'm not sure. But how do you deal with judgment when you're having that rough morning? You're quickly calling your husband just to kind of express emotions that you might be feeling and then kind of get back on the day. Because I tend to kind of judge myself of like, you're not strong enough. Why are you crying, Yasmin? It's not the end of the world, because it's not. But
I'm like a very passionate person. And so that shows itself in many different emotions and forms. And I don't think there's anything wrong with expressing how you're feeling. I think where crying in particular or anger or any of those emotions get dangerous is when you sit in it for too long and you then allow it to really dictate like how you're showing up and how you're able to think. And so for me, it's been really important over the years to recognize that some days I do just need to like have a vent session and let it out. And like knowing that the next day I'm going to wake up in the morning, listen to my pump up song in the car, or, which has taken many different shapes and forms over the years. My current one is this weird song called Nature. And it's just like, it's like this person is like trees, nature, the ground, like just to kind of ground myself and knowing that it's okay to have a downbeat because I know I'm going to be able to recover and pick myself back up. Where I think it gets dark is when you allow yourself to spend too much time in the sadness and the frustration and the anger. And that can very easily start to translate itself into victim mode or victim mentality. And it's really, really hard to live your life and also operate a business when you are sitting in victim mode. So that's been like a learning for me along the way.
I love that you're still even to this day doing pump up songs. And I know you've mentioned, the early days of the business. There's so much that you need to do to create that momentum for yourself, right? It's all about that momentum. No one's going to be like, Joanna, today's the day that we're going to do this. Like you are that person. So were you just like listening to music, or how were you building that momentum for yourself in those early days where it's all stage of business is hard, but maybe in those more vulnerable times?
Yeah, I've always loved music. I think because I worked in music before I started Knix, and so music has always played like a very important part in my life. The other thing I started doing early on, and we still do this now as a team, is when you get a really kind, profound message from a customer, to actually take the time to save it and put it somewhere so that in those moments where you feel like you can't get anything right or nothing's going the way you hope it is, to just like go back to what your customers and community are actually telling you and remind yourself that like, oh, okay, we are making a difference. Like people do care about the work that we're doing and it is worthwhile. And then very early on, I got great advice from a mentor of mine at the time who could tell that I had a hard time fighting for myself. I grew up in a very Christian upbringing and family, and the idea of like fighting for your own success felt quite selfish to me. And it's not really the way that I was raised. I was raised in a family with like doctors and ministers and teachers, and very much like you live your life in service of others. And so from very, very early on, Knix became a mission focused organization. So what is the work that we're really doing? Selling underwear, selling swimsuits, selling activewear, like that is the means for us to be able to deliver against like our broader purpose and mission. And when I started evaluating success, not just against financial targets, but also against like what we really meant by having an impact, it really helped kind of add clarity to like the why behind the fight and the reason to fight and the motivation to kind of get out of bed.
And that's so important. And I don't think it's talked enough about. I have a lot of friends who are similar to you, like bit farther down their journey. And they've mentioned similarly, like those financial targets, yeah, it's exciting to hit, but once it's like a moving target, you will never be always happy. So you need a reason to wake up and deal with the hard. So that why and that mission sounds so obvious, but it's true. If you're just getting in it for money or to do a quick flip or whatever, you're going to crumble because it's not easy. You need like a broader mission. So I can see that being a huge driver. And I definitely see that in my life. So I want to talk about, life before Knix. You mentioned you were in music, music is a passion of yours. It was a dream for you to work at a record label. You got that. Fast forward, you ended up going to grad school and getting your MBA, and your passions shifted. It kind of came out of nowhere. So tell me more about how you discovered this passion of yours, because it did ultimately lead to Knix.
So I've always had the entrepreneurial bug. I think inside of organizations I was working at before, I was like entrepreneurial, for lack of a better way to describe it. I spoke at my old record label like maybe 2 years ago, and they reminded me that like I brought Facebook to the label. Like I was just always like so fascinated by the business side of the industry and like where things were headed, and was always really curious about businesses and how they operated. I'm that annoying friend where if you go to a restaurant with me, I'll like see every operational inefficiency,
You, Joanna. I'm like, can I just turn it off sometimes? But it's nonstop.
You can't, and it's brutal. It's like, who
My husband's
cares?
like, don't solve other people's problems. I'm like, but why is it like that? Like, that's funny. But anyways, I interrupted you. Sorry about
No,
that.
so I've been that person. It's so interesting. Like, I didn't realize when I was creating Knix that I actually was creating a company that made a lot of sense based on my background. And what I mean by that is that whether I was working in music or film or television, I just really, really understood the importance of storytelling. And you can tell a story through song, you can tell it through film, you can tell it through art. And that if you can make someone feel something, feel connected, feel, seen, that is one of the most profound things that we as people can kind of experience. And so when we started Knix, I was felt really compelled to do it because I understood that leaks, period leaks, pee leaks, like all these things were having such a negative effect on people's self-esteem and the way they felt about themselves. And I saw the opportunity to really do something and make a difference. And having worked with like a lot of celebrities, high profile people, I learned over time that like each and every one of us is just a person. We have one life and it's up to us what we want to do with it. And so through this kind of exploration around period underwear, leak proof underwear, I really felt like I had a chance to do something that could have an impact and make a difference. And then over the years, as we built the company, we really became what I think is incredible storytellers. Like we love to tell human stories. We've done a lot of really creative things as a brand, be it like creating a podcast, writing a book, we're funding a documentary. Like we make these beautiful brand moments and campaigns. And so I'm almost back where I started in many ways, which is like having a platform that we can use to build connection with folks around like the importance of community and feeling seen.
I love that. You never know how your life will work its way out. Like everything you were doing prior, you're just bringing it in a different platform. So I love that because you would have never expected it. And every experience you have will benefit you in somehow. And you are just showing that. So kind of going back to those early days, you had this idea, you're in business school. I know you had won a competition. So had like 20,000, funds to kind of get it going. Tell me more about those early days of testing the product, because I think it took you about 9 months before you started production, if I got that correctly. But you were very scrappy and you were doing your due diligence. So tell me more about what that looked like.
Yeah, so I worked on the idea the whole time I was doing my MBA. I went to this school called INSEAD, which is outside of Paris, and I got every friend to help me. I would get them to do wild things. Like there's no other way to explain it. I remember one course, which was all about kind of product design and iteration. I had about 10 of my friends each wear like every reusable diaper and pad that I could find on the market. And I'd give them like containers of water and liquid and SMS them, because this was 2011, throughout the day and be like, time to go empty the water into your like product that you're testing for me. And, in the morning, they were pretty good sports about it. They'd be like, I feel okay. It's not bad. Like, it's a little bit uncomfortable. And by the end of the day, by like the eighth water drop, they're like, fuck you. Like,
Yeah, they're good friends.
I hate you. Like, I can't believe you convinced me to wear this like massive diaper all day and like what's happening. But yeah, I started Scrappy. And when I graduated, what I realized about like creating an entire new product, a new product category, is that it's a puzzle. Like there's a million different pieces of the puzzle that you can put together to get to an output. And so it's all about, finding the components of the puzzle that we wanted to make work. And we were making something so inherently different from what existed on the market at the time that I also was very aware that like we didn't have to like reinvent underwear in its totality. We were reinventing the category by creating this like absorbency function. And so was able to kind of look around at the underwear category and pick the best of the best and then infuse it with our technology, which allowed us to move a lot quicker.
Building that technology, was it pretty capital intensive? So you graduate college, like did you have another job that you were just helping make ends meet while you were figuring out with a team this technology? Because it seems very intricate. So it's like, where do you start with that?
I did. I went back to the TV network that I'd been working at just before going to school. I did some consulting work with like one program and host there. And I worked there part-time until I realized that like I was the limiting factor in the business. Like things couldn't move along unless I had more time to give to it. And that's when I ended up kind of transitioning away and working on it full time.
Yeah. And that's good to hear, because sometimes some people are like, oh, should I go all in? And it's like, it's a little bit safer. I mean, everyone's circumstance is so different and like what your situation is. But yeah, it's nice that you took that pause and went all in when like you knew that your capacity was holding the business back. So you're creating this new product. What was the manufacturing process in the early days? Because creating something new is not easy.
Yeah, one of the ugliest physical objects I've seen in my lifetime is still the first sample we got back.
Which is devastating, by the way. Getting that horrible first sample, it hurts your heart, right?
Yeah, you're like, wow, this is not it. This is not it. Like, and so that was tricky. And I ended up going actually to Korea at first to manufacture the products. set up a trade trip through the Korean consulate, and they took me around to different manufacturers. And when I had someone there sort of advocating for me, that really helped things move faster. It was challenging at first. It was challenging to get people to take me seriously. I didn't have a design background, so I know now for a fact I sounded like I had no idea what I was talking about because I officially had no idea what I was talking about. And I got a lot of strange looks because it was something so new and different that they hadn't seen before, that they were really kind of curious about how it was all going to come together. But what I think is so cool about that is sometimes those strange moments are what ends up leading to like big breakthroughs. So the example that I use is I didn't know how to sew. I like have no background in product design. So I never really understood like the underwear that was sewn and the patterns and the different components. But I was 5 years old once and I owned a glue gun. I had like a glue stick and scissors. And so I was really drawn to bonded products just because my brain could logically understand them. And that bonding innovation we've patented and has been like a really important part of the Knix aesthetic. We went on to become kind of one of the first brands to make bonded bras a really big success. If you go to any department store now, you'll see them everywhere. We launched those back in 2015. And so it was this weird, like what could have been seen as a negative or a skill set that was missing, which was a lack of design acumen, that actually ended up with us doing something in a different way than most people were doing it, that ended up creating and carving like a whole new way of thinking about products in the category. So it's just cool how those things kind of end up coming together.
I love that. I actually did not know that part of the story. That's amazing. And so going back to, you've very cool. You went to Korea and you were hands-on, trying to find the right manufacturer. It's so much better to see them in person if you can. But you ended up, launching your product on Kickstarter, which I know was a thing back then.
Yes, it was very popular then. We have to remember that it was 2013. That's how you launched a product. You're like, oh, yes, yes.
Totally. And your business actually looked very different. So maybe you can walk us through what that experience was like and how it kind of shifted what Knix looked like at that time.
I launched on a crowdfunding platform and our campaign was going honestly fine, like reasonably well. But it really dawned on me that it was like very, very hard to get one person to buy an item. Like I was spending all my time and effort kind of trying to get like person by person. And so I had this wild idea that what if instead of trying to get one person to buy an item, we tried to get one retailer to buy a lot of items. And so I had this PR kind of stunty idea to pitch some major retailers and to become the first brand that was like discovered through a crowdfunding platform and that landed national distribution. So much to my surprise, delight, that worked. Like I think the retailers were like, oh, this is a cool angle and story. No one's doing this. We're going to look really like innovative and forward looking. And so I ended up getting Hudson's Bay, which is Canada's largest department store, to pre-order our product through this crowdfunding campaign. They had to set up a PayPal account, like literally all these hoops for this like multi-billion-dollar company being like, how do we purchase this? But we found our way through. And I found myself sort of unintentionally in the wholesale business. And with a team of 2 people, 3 people, servicing like a major national retailer. And we went down this path of being a wholesale company. And so I went and spent probably 2 to 3 years at trade shows, doing trunk shows, sort of like that, sales warrior, just like with my suitcase and my plastic bum in hand, like going from place to place, and lots of security fun moments with my plastic bum going through the security screen.
That's funny.
You're like, what is this? And that was the first 3 years of Knix, was that. And it was going honestly fine. It was just was not going as fast as I had wanted it to, or as fast as I had thought it would. And so almost by necessity versus choice, we ended up going back to a crowdfunding campaign, had created this great bra, which is that bonded bra, and didn't have enough money to fund production. We're kind of in a vulnerable situation and state, and decided to take another kick at the can at fundraising on Kickstarter. And we sold more in a month than I had in the first 2.5 years of the business combined.
Crazy. I have goosebumps.
Yeah, it was wild. We became the most funded fashion project in the history of the platform, which for a bra was like really, really mind blowing. And a bunch of signals and different things were happening where I was realizing that I think I had the right products, but I had the wrong distribution strategy. And so I ended up basically starting over 3 years in, switching fulfillment centers, switching packaging, switching everything, and then relaunching the business as a direct to consumer company, cutting our revenue by 70 to 80% in the process to do that. So, like, a really big risk. And then following that decision, we saw just shy of 4,000% 3 year growth. And it's like back to storytelling and connection. We had these products that people were deeply interested in. We just needed the chance to communicate it directly with them.
And I know you said that was like one of the boldest moves you've made. I mean, that is bold, and great things come from these bold moves. And it's kind of like you have to be calculated sometimes as an entrepreneur and then just go for it. But that's not an easy thing. You're still, you mentioned you did that Kickstarter because you guys were vulnerable. You needed money, getting out of 800 retailers to bet on this idea, that takes a lot of guts. So what made you feel comfortable about that? Was it like you really saw this incredible momentum with Kickstarter where you knew you're like, I got to go all in on this or else we're going to be missing out on the opportunity? Like, how do you build that guts?
I want to say it was extremely intuitive, but there were like a couple of different things that were happening all in tandem that just made me feel like we were on the wrong path. So obviously the success of that campaign and seeing that, wow, people do want to buy these products on the internet. I had no idea. We were having a lot of challenges with some of our retail partners. Knix was very early on body positivity, body inclusivity. We were the first brand to photograph our products on every size. And at the time, this was like 2015, 2016, we were probably one of the only brands talking about this. Like, it was not the world it is now. It was very distinct. And so, kind of rightfully so, a lot of consumers were like, wow, I trust this brand. They make my size. I'm going to drive to a local retailer and try to buy it. And nobody wanted to carry our size range. So what we were hearing over and over again from our community was, I was so excited to try this. I literally got in my car and drove an hour only to find out that I'm too big for the range that the store carried. And we had no influencer sway. Like, no, I couldn't convince stores that larger sizes also deserved to have representation in stores. It was before people caught on to that. And so that was creating a really big brand disconnect. And then the third thing that happened at the same time was we got what was going to be our biggest order in the history of our wholesale sort of partnership and development. And it was a retailer that sold underwear, but they also sold like quite a lot of guns. And at that point in time, for me, it felt like the height of like violence in schools. I just didn't feel right about it, to be honest. I just didn't feel right about our products being sold alongside guns. And so we turned down that order that we'd been working on for like 2 years. And all of these signals were just like, maybe there's a different way to do this. Maybe there's a different way to build the brand that is more in line with the way that we want to do it. And people were mad at us. There's still independent retailers that were really instrumental in helping us build Knix that when we backed out were so angry. I ended up making unintentionally like some enemies through that, but you sometimes have to disappoint some people to kind of find your way,
And it's like at the end of the day, you have to be okay with the decisions you make because you're the one that you don't want certain things to keep you up at night. That's what I've realized. Like, you need to do what feels right to you because it's only you and yourself, and you don't want to like do anything that kind of goes against your intuition and your gut. And I'm curious, I know at that time, so there's a lot actually going on behind the scenes. So you're blowing up on Kickstarter, like the biggest you've ever done, but you're dealing with all these moving parts and disappointing retailers and doing this transition. You mentioned, I believe at that time, you actually went through a major bout of depression. I don't know if I read this correctly, but if you feel comfortable, do you mind going through what you were feeling at the time? And was it shortly after that?
Yeah. So we made this bonded bra. It's called the Evolution bra, and it was a reversible bra. So on top of having like all of these great features, because it was bonded, we could have like black on one side and beige on the other side, or like blue and pink, whatever. So the idea was you could wear this bra 8 different ways. And everything was looking good when we were going through prototyping. But when we got ready to go into production, the dye from the bra was seeping through onto the other side. And so we had to kind of like isolate, figure out, why is this happening? Why didn't this happen before? and we fell really behind on the delivery of this product because we thought, maybe we're going to sell $100,000 worth. We ended up selling 1 million. So production wise, we were making a lot more. And then we just had issues kind of going into production. And so we ran really behind. It was not the greatest era for Kickstarter, I would say, because there were a lot of brands making lots of money and then never delivering the products. And so there was just a lot of mistrust, I would say, and rightfully so, that if people didn't deliver when they said they were going to deliver, that they were just going to steal your money and not give it to you. And so I started receiving a lot of angry messages. And I put so much pressure on that moment because I've been working for so hard for so long that I convinced myself that if I messed it up, everything else was like the whole company was going to go under, that this was like my one shot. And if I didn't do it right, that like it was all going to be taken away from me. And so I think just that like compounding pressure while at the same time acknowledging that the 3 years I'd spent building the business, I didn't take the right approach, and the sort of humility it takes to start over. I really found myself in a pretty dark place. And it's funny because at that moment we were like doing better than we'd done before. So it wasn't about sales performance. It was about like internal pressure and just me sort of crumbling under it and really questioning if I had what it takes. And there were a lot of people that helped me. I remember I called a good friend of mine who I'd gone to business school with and who'd had a pretty senior job at Zara and had just been taking a break. And she came from New York to Toronto and she spent a month with me, and she literally stayed at my house. And every morning she was like, okay, tell me how you structure your day. Like, what do you do? And I couldn't tell her. I was like, I don't know. I don't know how to focus. I don't know how to prioritize. And she helped me like day by day, just be like, okay, let's write down 3 things we want to do today. Let's take this piece by piece. And she helped really rebuild kind of my confidence in my like capability, truly.
Oh my gosh. I can't imagine the weight that you felt. I am in the process of dealing with a very small like inventory issue sellout, and I feel the pressure of getting it to people on time. And we're just thousands of customers. I literally was telling my husband, like, what do people do when there's millions of dollars at stake and multiple products? Like, I'm now on the other side, but I could only imagine the weight because I felt that for the first time at that magnitude, being a little bit bigger of a company. So I know there's a lot of pressure you have on yourself to like get it out there, and you don't want to disappoint people. Like, that is the hardest part. You're like, I want to deliver. I stand for my brand. This is not, I could go off on a whole tangent on this, but yes, I could imagine it being really difficult. And I'm curious, when you have gone through tough times like that, fast forward many years later, I'm sure you've had many hiccups, many losses, even bigger financial losses, given how much you've grown. Like, do you ever build that? I don't know if resilience is the right word, or like guts to manage it. Cause I'm like, I don't know if I can have 3 days of like sleepless nights for 10 more years. Does it get easier?
It's such a tricky question. Does it get easier? I don't know if it gets easier, but your resiliency gets so much stronger. And so when I look at things now, like even in a typical day, there's often things that I know 10 years ago would have had me like on the floor, not really being able to kind of like pick myself back up and carry on with the day. And now I can like brush so many things off and find my way through and know this is bad, this is annoying, this is unfortunate, this is disappointing, but it's not going to be the thing that kind of breaks us. And the one thing I learned honestly from that Kickstarter campaign that was probably counterintuitive to what a lot of people would have done, just going back to that idea of like everything's perfect, it's coming, is I made a video and I looked like a disaster, truly. I had like completely, but I was like, look, I'm really sorry. This is what's happened. This is what happened when we went into production. We are working on it. I feel terrible that there's delays. Like, here's what we're going to do about it. And when we just explained to people what was happening, everybody understood. And so I think a lot of the times with Knix over the years, like if we've ever found ourselves in a situation where it's like, okay, we've let our customers down or we've done something that could be construed as doing that, our typical instinct now is we just lead with honesty. We just explain the situation, say what's happening, own it, apologize, and sort of say what the plan is going forward. And I think that's all people want from brands is they want acknowledgement and honesty and sort of openness, you know?
I love that. And I have heard that from a few women on the pod or many women on the podcast. And I use that in my disastrous situation. And you're right. Like people give you grace. They love the honesty. They love the over communication, like keeping them posted along the journey. So, thanks to women like you, I've taken those nuggets and I'm like, okay, it's manageable. People appreciate it. So that's good that you brought that into your life, even in the later stages of Knix and how that works. So I love that. So I know we're kind of coming up on time soon. I want to talk about a few other things quickly. Thinking more about fundraising. I know you guys, well, you said you basically use less than $1 million to generate your first 50 million, which is like incredible. I feel like we need a part two. There's so much to unpack in your story. It's like you need to write a book. I don't know if that's coming, but there's so
I
much.
do want to write a book. I do want to, at some point. It's on my to-do list.
Yeah, because I know there's probably so many things that, from each phase of the business and your own personal journey that you can talk about. So I'm excited for that book one day. But fast forwarding a little bit, you raised a Series A and then you went out to raise a Series B. Tell me more about how that experience was. Maybe most notably your Series B, because that was kind of the last fundraising round you had. I'd love to just hear about your experience with that.
Yeah, so they're kind of connected. I raised my Series A, had a really great process, ended up getting quite a few offers. At the 11th hour, for a bunch of different reasons, myself and the partner decided to part ways. They're an incredible fund. They've gone on to do great things. We've gone on to do great things. And I found myself the next morning taking a pregnancy test and finding out that I was pregnant with my son.
And that's your first?
This is my first, yes. And the next morning I was also closing on a house because I kind of preemptively bought this home because I thought I was taking some money off of the table, but in walking away from the deal, I was also walking away from the money to buy the house. So it was kind of like this perfect storm of just dynamics. And I ended up going back out and starting over on my Series A. And
why did you back out? What caused you? Just gut or
just gut or instincts. I mean, I was like, again, an incredible fund. It was going to be their first investment out of the fund, like really seasoned investors with their first investment. And I had been someone else's first investment. And there's just a lot of pressure and a learning curve around being someone's first investment. Like, not everything goes according to plan. There's ups and downs, there's highs and lows. So I just was kind of getting the sense that like, I didn't want to go through that experience again. It was just the reality,
Yeah.
I ended up going back out to raise money. I found myself in the dynamic that no one wants to find themselves in, which was I was raising money while pregnant. I wasn't desperate, but I wasn't like super, confident or stable. I ended up tolerating a lot of comments and things that I just like upon reflection, when I looked back on it, really wish that I hadn't. And so we found great partners for our Series A. I'm so happy with who we worked with. And 2 years later, decided that the brand was doing really well. And I wanted to go raise like our first significant amount of capital. And so my board was super supportive. And when I brought it up with them, I shared, I'm actually pregnant again. And this time I'm having twins. And so I was on a path to be having 3 kids under 2, which is a lot. But I was also like a woman on a mission. Like I was like, I want to raise this money before my kids are born because I just want to have like a lot of confidence that like the business is set up for success and we're in a good spot. And so my board was really supportive and we hired investment bankers and I set out to raise this fundraising round while pregnant with my twins. And in the first sort of investor speed dating round that I did, I spoke with about 30 or 35 different investors. And most of the conversations were positive, but some of them were a bit, prickly. And when I regrouped with the bankers after the fact, they were like, well, maybe we should push the timeline. Maybe this isn't the best timeline, like maybe we should wait till after you have your kids. And I was like, okay, tell me what's really going on here. And they're like, well, the reception was overall good, but there were a few people who were like, made some comments about your pregnancy. And I was like, no one wants to be the last money in before she has twins. What if she takes the money and runs? Like, how's she going to be able to manage all these things? And so I decided in that moment that I was going to move forward on my timeline, but that any person who made any kind of negative or disparaging comment about my ability to be a mom and build a company was cut from the process. And I didn't want to know their names. I didn't want to know who they were. I didn't want to think about them in my brain. I didn't want to give them that thing. They would just be like no longer in the running and in the process. And so we raised that round and we closed the deal The Friday afternoon at like 4 p.m., the money hit the bank. It was a $50 million fundraising round, largest round by a solo Canadian female founder at the time, which was wild. The Monday morning, I gave birth to my twin daughters on International Women's
Wow.
Day.
Really?
Yeah.
That close?
Yeah.
I'm thinking you're like 6 months
Oh
pregnant.
no, it was
No
tight. It was
way.
tight. I was being induced due to the twins. So like literally on the Friday, I was like, it's go time. Like this is happening Monday at 8 a.m. And then the really wild thing about what happened is that the Tuesday while I was still in hospital, I got the email from Essity, who ended up acquiring us, saying, hey, Joanna, we haven't spoken in a while, but we would really love to chat with you. And so I wrote them back. It's like, your timing's terrible. I just raised $50 million. I'm literally in the hospital still. I just had 2 babies yesterday, but sure, let's reconnect and talk. And that started the path that I'm on now, which is partnering with Essity, and the acquisition that took place about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Oh my, and that was about a year after you closed that round. When did it officially close?
Yeah, so we started talking like literally 3 days
Wow.
later. And then we ended up making the announcement of the transaction like roughly a year later, 15 months later or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was a slower process, but I wasn't looking to sell the company. That wasn't on my team, like always talks about a bingo card. That wasn't on my bingo card for the year. And I really wanted to make sure it was the right decision. And so I think in those like very permanent long-term decisions, it's good to take your time.
Thank you for paving the way for so many women in terms of building a business, having a family. You don't have to choose. It's possible to do both. Like seeing examples like you just reassures me on my own path. So I know you're impacting so many, and like incredible that those investors that were out, it's like 1 year later you had one of the biggest exits, or the largest female founded exit in Canada, and one of the largest in the US. It's like, F you, look what you missed out on. What did that feel like for you?
It felt awesome. It felt amazing. I won't lie. I got a lot of messages from different folks that had passed over the years being like, wow, we really made a mistake. And it also just made me feel so good sticking to my guns of like not even allowing people who think that way to be anywhere near our company, because they do not deserve my success, my team's success. They don't deserve to be a part of it. And I just so fundamentally believe that if we want to see change, when we have the opportunity to say no and to be the ones that decide, we have to pick the right people. And so it felt really good. And it felt good for me, but honestly, it just felt good for the broader community too, because having built a brand that was very centered on women's health, that talked about things like periods and urine, like incontinence leaks and boobs and everything, I just so many times along the way, I got told that it was too niche or like a lifestyle business, or, would be a great, just all the things that you can think. And so it did feel very good.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Feels good for me. Yeah. The whole niche comment, because I'm in the women's health space and I'm like, how are women niche? Like this makes no sense. Or even with the podcast, like you're in a niche category. And I'm like, what? So yeah, that good. I'm so proud of everything you've built and like how you're really shifting the industry and the way people think about it. And I want to ask one last question. I know we have a few minutes here. Is, the fact that you had 3 kids under the age of 2 with a growing business. I don't like the word balance, but what did it look like kind of behind the scenes of how you managed your life at the time? How did you structure that to support this high growth business, but obviously you're still involved mom? I'd love to know the behind the scenes of that.
Yeah, so this is going to sound very strange, but one of the best things that happened for me was COVID. So I was going like a million miles a minute and it was not sustainable at all. And when COVID happened, I was really forced to kind of slow down and take a minute. And I am from Toronto, so a lot of people don't recognize this, but we were in lockdown for 2.5 years.
Yeah, it was strict.
Like 2.5 years. So my whole pregnancy, really the first year of my kids' lives, I just walked up and down the hall, like, and sat in front of my laptop. And I ended up through that being able to be there for a lot of key moments that I otherwise would have missed. Like I got to see all of my kids take their first steps. And sorry, I get emotional, but it's just like, without that, I never would have had it, And so that dynamic of sort of being able to work from home and be around my kids really helped. I have an incredibly supportive partner who also works at Knix. And so we really are a joint force. And we made that decision very intentionally in late 2017 that if this was going to work and if we were going to work, we had to do it together. And then I have like the best nanny in the entire world who's been with us since the day my son was born. And she's like, just has been incredible with our whole family. And so we have like cumulatively just a really great support system.
I love that. And I also got emotional in another interview where someone had asked you, when you got this money wired in your account with the exit, like what was one of the things that you spent it on? And I think you mentioned you bought a house for your nanny. Is that right?
I did. Yeah.
I love when you were explaining why you did that. Do you mind just kind of sharing? Because I was super touched.
Yeah, it's so funny. I haven't talked about this till recently, even though it's been a while, but she's shared and that's great. So I feel like I can share. But the day that the deal got announced, we were in our kitchen and it was me, myself, like me, Dave, and my husband and Rebecca. And we sort of looked at her and we're like, you've been such a huge part of this. Like, what can we do for you? And I knew there were like lots of folks on my team that were making money because they'd had stock options and they'd had all these different things. And so it was kind of a weird dynamic where I was like, wow, okay, all these other key contributors to Knix are making money from this exit, but this person who's been with me every step of the way, who I literally couldn't have done it without, doesn't get anything. And so through that, we asked her, do you want this, or this? And she said a house. And we're like, okay, great. Let's do it. And that's really the way that I looked at it. And Dave, my partner, looked at it is like, we could have had any CFO, any CMO, any of those people, and you could have swapped them in with different people. And like the outcome maybe wouldn't have been any different. But if we hadn't had that support person at home, especially having 3 kids in 2 years, to really like prioritize our family, our lives, that we never would have been able to do what we did. And I'm fortunate enough, like I have some great friends and have really learned to appreciate that like we need to celebrate all kinds of work.
Yeah, totally.
We overlook housework. We overlook like the role that being a stay-at-home mom is. We overlook like janitorial work, like just all of these different kinds of work. And I saw firsthand that like the person like who was with us worked harder than anyone else that I had ever seen and cared more than anybody else. It is something I probably will start talking about more because I think I would love for more people to think that way.
Yeah, I love that. And also knowing how important support was for you on your journey. Like you saying you could have had the best CFO, the best CEO, but you could not have done anything you were doing without that strong support system. Because I think sometimes women see women, quote unquote, doing it all, but they don't really know what's the village that they have behind the scenes. And they're like, why can't I do it all? I'm exhausted. I'm taking care of my kid. I'm doing my business. So I love that you're talking about that. And she's been such a big pillar. That is now on my goals. We don't have kids yet, but one day when we have a nanny and we get, a liquidity event of some sort, to do something incredible like that, because it's so, so key. And I love that. But no, Joanna, this is awesome. I could just continue talking to you, but I know we're hitting time. But thank you for joining us and just being who you are and so real and vulnerable. This was so refreshing. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for chatting with me. I loved our conversation. So excited to keep in touch.